All right, so today we're diving into a scenario that feels like it was ripped straight from a political thriller, but it's actually grounded in years and years of a real-world crisis. Venezuela, a nation that's been pushed right to the absolute brink. Picture this. It's 2 o'clock in the morning in Caracas. A mother is just trying to prepare a bottle for her baby when her daughter screams those exact words. This isn't some movie scene. It's the raw, chaotic sound of a country hitting its breaking point. So, that chaotic night, that's our starting point. We're jumping into a near-future scenario where U.S. Special Forces have just nabbed the Venezuelan leader, Nicolas Maduro. He's been whisked away and is now facing narco-trafficking charges in New York. Just like that, the strongman is gone. Okay, so this whole situation just begs two massive questions that we've got to unpack. First, how on earth did a country sitting on the largest proven oil reserves in the world completely and totally collapse? And second, after all this turmoil, what in the world comes next? In the immediate aftermath of Maduro's capture, Venezuela is a nation just holding its breath. There's this incredible tension in the air, a mix of real fear of what's to come, but also this fragile, cautious hope for some kind of real change after nearly 3 decades of authoritarian rule. So, what's the official reason for such a dramatic intervention? Well, it's being framed as a strategic move, all about securing the Western Hemisphere. The stated goals are pretty clear: combat drug trafficking, try to slow down mass migration, and of course, undercut the influence of U.S. rivals like China and Russia in America's backyard. With Maduro out of the picture, the U.S. suddenly has this gigantic to-do list. The administration is immediately meeting with oil executives to talk about rebuilding Venezuela's absolutely shattered energy sector. They also have to figure out what to do with all this Venezuelan oil that's just stuck on tankers out at sea. And maybe the biggest question of all, what happens now with those crippling economic sanctions? To even begin to understand what happens next, we have to look back at how Venezuela got here in the first place. This wasn't some sudden collapse. This was a long, slow-motion catastrophe, a descent from being an oil-rich powerhouse into total economic ruin. This timeline really shows the key turning points. It all kicks off back in 2007 when Hugo Chavez starts seizing the assets of foreign oil companies. Then, in 2013, Maduro takes over right as global oil prices are crashing. From there, you see a series of elections that are condemned internationally, which leads the U.S. to impose these crushing sanctions in 2019. There's a glimmer of hope in 2024 for fair elections, but when that falls through, the U.S. brings back the maximum pressure campaign, which really sets the stage for this whole intervention. And this chart, wow. This graph tells you pretty much everything you need to know. Just look at that red line. That is not a recession, my friends. That is a complete and utter economic freefall. Venezuela's GDP just plummets year after year after year. It's a decline worse than what most countries see even during a full-blown war. The scale of this disaster was just immense. For 6 years straight, the economy did nothing but shrink. The government's brilliant response? Just print more money. And that, of course, triggered a hyperinflation spiral that became one of the worst the world has ever seen. We're talking 1920s Germany levels of bad. And this, of course, brings us to a hugely controversial part of the story, the role of U.S. sanctions. Now, there's no doubt the government's own mismanagement laid the groundwork for this crisis, but many people argue that the sanctions that hit in 2017 and 2019 were what basically pushed the economy right off a cliff. This data point right here is absolutely central to that argument. What we're looking at is something called total factor productivity. It's basically a measure of how efficient an economy is. And look at that sharp, sudden break in the trend right after 2017. That's when the first major U.S. economic sanctions hit. Productivity, which was already falling but kind of stabilizing, just completely nosedived. And this all leads to a really fierce debate. On one side, you have people who say, look, sanctions were the only tool we had left to pressure the Maduro regime and try to restore democracy. But on the other hand, opponents argue that this whole maximum pressure strategy was the main driver of the economic collapse, causing unbelievable human suffering without actually getting Maduro out of power. So when economists actually dig into the numbers, they find some pretty specific effects. The sanctions directly hammered oil production, the country's lifeline, and that, in turn, completely slashed their ability to import essential things like food and medicine. One analysis even estimates that the sanctions accounted for more than half, 56%, of the catastrophic drop in income per person. So, we've talked about GDP and sanctions, but what does an economic collapse of this size actually look like for real people on the ground? Well, it looks like people leaving. The economic crisis very quickly turned into a massive humanitarian crisis, sparking one of the largest migrations in modern history. And this chart just lays it out so clearly, it's devastating. The red line, that's income per person, just falling off a cliff. The blue bars, that's the number of people fleeing the country. As the economy craters, the exodus just explodes. And the sheer numbers are just staggering. By late 2019, an estimated 4.5 million people had already fled Venezuela. That is more than the entire population of many countries, all escaping poverty, hunger, and political repression. And this is where it gets really crucial for policymakers today. Check this out. One study projected that if the U.S. went back to a full maximum pressure sanctions policy, an additional 1 million people would be forced to leave over the next 5 years. It just goes to show how these policy decisions have direct, massive human consequences. You know, this whole thing wasn't happening in a vacuum. The collapse of Venezuela basically turned into a giant chessboard for global powers, and every single one of them had their own strategic interests in how it all played out. So let's look at the key players. On one side, you've got the United States trying to maintain stability and push back against its rivals. But on the other side, you had Russia propping up Maduro with military and economic aid, and China acting as his key banker, loaning billions of dollars that was supposed to be repaid with oil. And closer to home, Cuba provided critical intelligence and support that helped keep the regime afloat. And this wasn't just speculation. The U.S. intelligence community themselves put it in black and white. This quote from a threat assessment says that the way these adversaries were all working together in places like Venezuela was seen as a direct challenge to U.S. influence, basically making them stronger against American interests. Okay, so let's circle all the way back to where we started, January 2026. Maduro's gone, but the country he left behind is an absolute wreck. The path to recovery is going to be incredibly steep, and it is littered with enormous obstacles. And the road ahead, man, it is just filled with massive hurdles. First, there's just huge political uncertainty. Who's actually in charge? The oil infrastructure is so decayed, it's going to take billions of dollars and years just to get it back online. Potential investors are super wary. They need legal guarantees about contracts and old debts. And frankly, with global oil prices low, why would a company pour money into such a high-risk country when there are safer bets elsewhere? And that's really the bottom line here, isn't it? Getting rid of one guy doesn't magically fix a country that's been broken for decades. After nearly 30 years of authoritarianism, Venezuelans are facing a tough question. Is this truly the beginning of a new democratic era? Or is it just another chapter of uncertainty? That remains the big unanswered question.